Before we dive into this thrilling story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest uploads. Your support keeps us going. Now, let's get into it. We were on a family vacation, but I wasn't part of the family. That much became clear the moment we sat down for dinner. The waiter led us to a long, beautifully set table at an upscale restaurant in Hilton Head, South Carolina. White linens, flickering candles, soft music playing in the background. It should have been a perfect evening. I was ready to take my seat beside my husband, Mark, when his father, Richard, casually shook his head and pointed at the waiter. "Oh, there must be a mistake," he said. "She needs her own table." For a second, I thought he was joking. I let out a small laugh, expecting the punchline. It didn't come. Instead, Richard looked at the waiter expectantly, as if waiting for him to correct the arrangement. I turned to Mark, waiting for him to step in. To tell his father that I was his wife, not some random outsider. That there was no need for separate seating arrangements. But Mark only sighed and shrugged, barely looking up from his menu. "It's just their way," he muttered, as if that explanation made any sense. "Their way?" I stood there, dumbfounded, while the waiter hesitated, unsure of what to do. Susan, my mother-in-law, didn't even glance at me as she picked up her wine glass. "You'll be more comfortable that way," she said dismissively. "Comfortable. Right." I wanted to argue. To demand an explanation. But I saw the way they looked at me, like I was a problem they'd rather not deal with. Like my presence was an inconvenience. So I sat at my own table. Alone. I should have left that night. Walked out of the restaurant, out of the vacation, out of this whole toxic dynamic. But I didn't. I told myself maybe it was just some weird tradition. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just for tonight. But it wasn't. The next morning, I woke up early, eager to join everyone for breakfast. I sent Mark a text. No reply. I figured they must still be getting ready, so I took my time. When I finally made my way down to the hotel restaurant, I searched for them. They weren't there. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. Confused, I wandered the hotel, checking different spots where they might be. 30 minutes passed before I finally found them. They were already seated at a large table, mid-meal. Laughing. Chatting. As if everything was perfectly normal. As if I didn't exist. I stood there, my stomach sinking. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming down?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Richard barely looked up from his plate. "We assumed you'd figure it out." Susan sipped her coffee, unconcerned. "It's just how we do things." I turned to Mark. He was already eating, acting like this was nothing out of the ordinary. Like it wasn't humiliating to be deliberately excluded from his own family's vacation. That was the moment it hit me. I wasn't part of their family. I never had been. And Mark, my own husband, wasn't on my side. The rest of the trip followed the same pattern. Every meal, I sat alone. Every group activity they forgot to tell me. A private boat tour? I found out when I saw the pictures on Instagram. A fancy wine tasting? I only realized when I saw them dressed up, heading out the door, laughing. I asked Mark about it later, still trying to make sense of it. "You could have texted me," I said, my voice tight. He sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "It's just their way." Again with that phrase. Their way. By the fourth day, I stopped trying. I stopped asking where they were going. Stopped waiting for invitations that would never come. If they wanted me to be invisible, fine. But they had no idea what was coming. Because I had my own way too. The trip was supposed to be perfect. When Mark first told me about the family vacation, I had been genuinely excited. A full week at a luxury resort in Hilton Head, South Carolina, a place straight out of a travel magazine. White sandy beaches stretching endlessly under the golden sun, tall palm trees swaying in the ocean breeze, crystal clear water lapping against the shore. The kind of destination that promised relaxation, the kind of trip where families grew closer, bonded over shared experiences, and created memories to last a lifetime. And more than anything, I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, this trip would be the turning point. It wasn't a secret that my relationship with Mark's parents had always been complicated. From the very beginning, there had been an unspoken divide, something I could never quite put my finger on. It was in the way Susan, my mother-in-law, would smile politely but never ask me questions about myself. The way Richard, my father-in-law, would glance at me with mild disinterest, as if I were nothing more than an accessory to his son's life. The way every family event felt like I was attending as an outsider, a tolerated guest rather than a daughter-in-law. But I had convinced myself that things would change. I thought if I just kept trying, if I was patient, if I was accommodating, if I proved myself to them, they would eventually welcome me in. This trip felt like my chance. A week together in a beautiful place, no distractions, no obligations, just family time. I pictured lazy afternoons by the pool, group dinners filled with laughter, late-night beach walks where we'd talk about anything and everything, warm and intimate moments where I would finally feel like I belong. So, when Mark told me his parents had invited us, I had agreed instantly. I even took care of the logistics, booking the resort, securing the car rental, making dinner reservations at the best restaurants in town. I wanted to show them I was thoughtful, that I cared, that I was committed to being part of the family. And yet, the moment we arrived, I felt something was off. Maybe it was the way Richard handled check-in, not even acknowledging my involvement, even though my name was on every reservation. Maybe it was the way Susan barely glanced at me when we met in the hotel lobby, offering a thin-lipped smile before turning her attention to Mark. Maybe it was the way their conversation seemed to flow easily with each other, inside jokes and family stories that I had never been a part of, references that I didn't understand. It was subtle. A slight turn of the body that excluded me from the circle of conversation. A hand on Mark's arm pulling him closer while leaving me to the side. A laugh that didn't include me, a question directed at everyone but me, a glance that skimmed over me as though I wasn't even standing there. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was being too sensitive. That maybe they were just tired from the flight, or maybe I was overanalyzing things. But then the small things kept adding up. When we went up to our rooms, Mark and I had a beautiful ocean view suite, the one I had booked for us. But when we entered, I noticed something strange. The adjoining suite next door, which I had reserved for his parents, had an open connecting door. I could hear them unpacking, chatting with Mark as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I tried to shake it off. It wasn't a big deal. But it made me feel like I was intruding on something private, as if I had somehow stumbled into a space where I wasn't fully welcome. Then came the first real sign. At dinner that night, we all walked into the restaurant together. The place was stunning, dimly lit with candlelight, soft music playing in the background, and tables set with polished silverware and folded napkins. It felt like the kind of restaurant where families celebrated milestones, where laughter and conversation filled the air. I followed Mark as the waiter led us to a long table, beautifully set for our group. My stomach fluttered with nervous anticipation. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. A chance to sit down, talk, connect, and maybe, just maybe, bridge the gap that had always been there. I pulled out a chair next to Mark, ready to take my seat. Then Richard spoke. "Oh, there must be a mistake," he said, his voice smooth, casual, as if he wasn't about to completely shatter my illusion. "She needs her own table." For a second, I thought I had misheard. The waiter hesitated, looking between us, uncertain. I blinked, my fingers still gripping the back of the chair. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Susan didn't even look up from her menu. "It's just how we do things," she said dismissively, as if that were a reasonable explanation. I turned to Mark, waiting for him to say something, to step in, to tell them this was absurd, that I was his wife, not some stranger. That of course I would be sitting with him. Instead, he sighed, shrugged, and muttered, "It's just their way." Their way. I let go of the chair slowly, feeling my heart hammer in my chest. The waiter still stood there, waiting for direction. Richard gave him a nod, motioning toward a smaller table a few feet away. A table for one. My skin burned with humiliation. 1,000 thoughts ran through my head in an instant. I could refuse. I could make a scene. I could demand an explanation. But as I looked around, I realized something. No one was looking at me. No one cared. To them, this wasn't unusual. It wasn't awkward. It was simply the way things were. And that hurt more than anything. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, something that wouldn't happen again. But it wasn't. It was just the beginning. That first dinner should have been the moment I walked away. I should have excused myself, packed my bags, and left. I should have realized right then and there that this was never going to change, that no amount of patience or effort on my part would ever make a difference. But I didn't. Instead, I convinced myself that it was just a weird tradition, an odd family quirk, something I could brush off. Maybe it was a test, or maybe they were simply uncomfortable with change. If I just stayed calm, if I just showed them I wasn't a threat, surely they'd warm up to me. That was my first mistake. The next morning, I woke up early, eager to join everyone for breakfast. I turned to Mark, who was still half asleep beside me, and nudged him lightly. "Hey," I whispered. "What time are we meeting your parents?" He groaned, rubbing his eyes. "Not sure. Just head down whenever." I frowned. "Aren't we going together?" He shrugged. "They'll be there. Just meet us." It felt off. But I pushed the feeling aside, reminding myself that not everything had to be a grand gesture. Maybe they were just relaxed about plans. Maybe they assumed I'd find my way. So I got ready, took my time, and headed down to the hotel restaurant. The place was bustling with morning chatter, the smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filling the air. I scanned the room, expecting to see them waiting for me. They weren't there. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. Maybe they were running late. I found a quiet corner and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. Something was wrong. Finally, I decided to look around. I wandered past the lobby, through the outdoor terrace, and into the resort's courtyard. And that's when I saw them. Richard, Susan, and Mark. Already seated at a large table, mid-meal, plates half empty, laughter bubbling in the air. They had started without me. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. For a second, I considered turning around, pretending I hadn't seen them. But my feet moved on their own, carrying me toward the table. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming down?" Richard barely looked up from his plate. "We assumed you'd figure it out." Susan sipped her coffee, her expression unreadable. "It's just how we do things. Just how they do things." Again. I turned to Mark, waiting for him to say something. Anything. But he only gave me a tired look, as if I was the one being difficult. By the time I sat down, their conversation had already moved on. I wasn't included. I was an observer, not a participant. That morning I barely ate. The rest of the day followed the same pattern. A group boat tour? I wasn't invited. A wine tasting? No one told me. By the time I saw them, they were already heading out, dressed in elegant evening wear, laughing like nothing was wrong. The first time it happened, I thought it was an oversight. The second time, I wondered if it was just bad timing. By the third time, I knew. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. And Mark, my own husband, wasn't just allowing it. He was part of it. That night, I confronted him. We had just gotten back to the room, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. I stood by the window, staring out at the dark ocean, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. "You could have texted me," I finally said, my voice tight. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Here we go." I turned sharply. "Excuse me? Look, I know you're upset," he muttered, tossing his phone onto the nightstand. "But this is just how they are. It's their way. His way. Their way." The words felt like a slap. "Mark," I said slowly, "we came on this trip together. But I've been eating alone. I've been sitting alone. I've been excluded from every single thing. And you don't care." His jaw tightened. "You're overreacting." "Overreacting." I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. "Do you even hear yourself?" He groaned. "Look, my parents have their traditions. You're making this a bigger deal than it is." Traditions. That was his excuse? "They're not just traditions, Mark. They're humiliating me." For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just stared at me, like he was seeing a problem he didn't want to deal with. Then he shrugged. "It's just for a few more days." A few more days. I turned away, swallowing the lump in my throat. I had spent years believing that, eventually, Mark would stand up for me. That he'd realize I was worth more than this. That night, I realized he never would. And that's when I stopped trying. I stopped waiting for invitations. I stopped asking questions. I let them ignore me. They wanted me to be invisible? Fine. But they had no idea what was coming. Because I had my own way too. I had spent the entire trip being ignored, sidelined, and treated like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. I had swallowed every bitter moment, every cold glance, every exclusion. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Mark slept beside me, I realized something. I was done. Done waiting for an invitation into a family that never wanted me. Done hoping that my husband would stand up for me. Done being invisible. If they wanted me to be separate, I would give them exactly what they asked for. But I wasn't just going to sit at a different table this time. No, I was going to remove myself entirely. And they were about to feel it. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Mark. My hands were steady as I reached for my phone, my mind already working through every step. Because, guess what? I had booked everything. The hotel? My name was on the reservation. The rental car? My credit card. The fancy dinner Richard had been bragging about for weeks? My account. The luxurious spa day Susan had been looking forward to. Oh yeah, I had booked that too. One by one, I pulled up each reservation on my phone. My fingers hovered over the cancellation button, a small smirk creeping onto my lips. Then, with one tap at a time, I erased their vacation. Hotel rooms? Cancelled. Rental car? Gone. Dinner reservations? Wiped clean. Spa appointments? Nope, not happening. By the time I was done, their carefully planned week had been reduced to nothing but a string of cancellation emails in their inboxes. I moved to my suitcase, packing up my things quickly but methodically. I wasn't just leaving, I was making sure they felt every second of my absence. I grabbed the keys to the rental car, the only car they had. Without it, they would be stranded at the resort. Mark was still asleep as I took one last look at him. For years I had convinced myself that if I just tried hard enough, if I was patient enough, he would finally see me. But now, standing there in the dim glow of the hotel room, I knew the truth. He had never seen me. I walked out, closed the door behind me, and never looked back. The drive to Charleston was peaceful. The moment I hit the open road, I rolled down the windows, letting the cool ocean breeze wash over me. For the first time in days, I could breathe. By the time I checked into my new hotel, I was already feeling lighter. I booked myself a luxury suite, ordered room service, and sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the waves roll in. Meanwhile, back in Hilton Head, panic was about to set in. I imagined the exact moment they realized what had happened. Richard stepping out of bed, groggy and grumbling, only to be met by the hotel manager at the door. "Sir, there seems to be an issue with your reservation." Susan, mid-stretch, reaching for her phone to check the day's itinerary, only to be met with a flood of cancellation emails. Mark, rubbing his temples, still half asleep, as his mother's voice escalated from mild irritation to full-on screaming. They had no rooms. No car. No plans. Just a rapidly growing sense of dread. It didn't take long for my phone to start buzzing. Mark. Then Susan. Then Richard. I watched as the calls came in one after another, my fingers tapping idly against my wine glass. I let them ring. Finally, after a dozen missed calls, I decided to pick up. Just for fun. The second I answered, Mark's voice came through, sharp with frustration. "Where are you?" I took a slow sip of my wine. "Charleston." A pause. "Charleston? What the hell are you doing there?" "Enjoying my vacation," I said simply. In the background, I could hear Susan yelling at the hotel staff. Richard was swearing under his breath. "You canceled everything?" Mark asked, his voice lower now, like he still couldn't quite believe it. "Yes." He sucked in a sharp breath. "Do you have any idea what you've done? My parents have nowhere to stay. We had plans. You left us stranded." "Oh no," I said, voice dripping with fake concern. "That must be so uncomfortable." Silence. Mark exhaled harshly, the realization settling in. "You." He stopped himself, his tone shifting. "Look, just come back. We can fix this." I laughed. "No, Mark. I really don't think we can." And then I hung up. I later found out just how badly things went for them. With the hotel fully booked, they had to scramble to find another place to stay. They ended up in a dingy roadside motel 20 minutes away, the kind with flickering lights and a strange smell in the air. No rental car meant they had to rely on Uber, but Hilton Head wasn't exactly packed with rideshare drivers. Surge pricing hit them hard. That fancy dinner Richard had been bragging about for weeks? Fully booked. Instead, they ended up eating at a loud, overcrowded tourist trap, surrounded by screaming kids and overpriced frozen seafood. And the spa Susan had been dying to go to? She threw a full-on tantrum when they told her there were no available slots. She demanded they fit her in anyway. They didn't. Mark sent me angry texts all night. "Mark, you seriously just left us like this?" "Mark, Mom is furious. She was humiliated at the spa." "Mark, Dad is losing his mind over the restaurant." "Mark, I hope you're happy." I was. At first, I thought that was the worst of it. A little inconvenience. A taste of their own medicine. But then something interesting happened. A few hours later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Mark. It was a message from Sarah, Mark's cousin. "Sarah. Hey, just wanted to say I heard what happened. And honestly? Good for you." I frowned, rereading the message. Sarah and I had always gotten along fine, but we weren't particularly close. Me. "Wait, what do you mean?" Her response made my stomach drop. "Sarah. They did the same thing to Mark's ex-wife." I sat up straight. "Me. Mark's ex-wife?" Mark had always told me his first marriage ended because they grew apart. Nothing dramatic, just differences that couldn't be fixed. I had never questioned it. Until now. "Sarah. Yeah. She went on a family trip with them. They treated her like garbage the entire time. Made her sit at a separate table. Ignored her. Acted like she wasn't even there. She left halfway through. Filed for divorce a month later." My heart pounded. "Me. Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Sarah. We figured you knew." I hadn't. Because if I had, I never would have gone on this trip. And if Mark had known, and still let it happen, then he wasn't just complicit. He was part of the game. I stared at the screen, my fingers tightening around my phone. This wasn't just about a ruined vacation. This was about something much bigger. And I wasn't done yet. I sat there for a long time, my phone still in my hand, my mind racing. The revelation had hit me like a punch to the gut. Mark had known. He had watched me suffer through the exact same treatment his ex-wife had endured, and he had let it happen. He had let me walk straight into it without a word of warning, without a single attempt to shield me from it. I thought back to every moment I had brushed off as a misunderstanding, every excuse he had made. It's just their way. I had spent so much time convincing myself that if I was patient enough, kind enough, understanding enough, they would eventually accept me. But they never would. Because it had never been about me. This was a game. A cruel, twisted family tradition that they had played before, and Mark, he wasn't just an innocent bystander. He was part of it. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. The way Susan had smirked when I sat at a separate table that first night. The way Richard had barely even glanced at me when I confronted them about leaving me behind. The way Mark had responded, not with guilt or surprise, but with that same tired shrug, that same dismissive sigh, as if he had already been through this before. Because he had. The realization made my blood turn cold. Mark wasn't just spineless. He wasn't just refusing to stand up to his parents. He was complicit. He had let this happen. And now I had proof. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself before typing my next message to Sarah. Me. Tell me everything. Her response came almost immediately. Sarah. They've done this before. A few times, actually. It's always the same. Mark brings someone home, and they test her. Push her. Isolate her. They see if she fits. If she fights back, she's difficult. If she tolerates it, she becomes another version of Susan. Either way, they win. I swallowed hard. Me. What happened to the others? Sarah. Most left. Some stayed longer than they should have. Rachel, the ex-wife, was the first to actually make it down the aisle. But she saw them for what they were, and she ran before they could break her completely. I clenched my jaw. Rachel had seen the truth. She had seen what I was only just beginning to understand. And she had saved herself before it was too late. The next message from Sarah came with a hesitation. Sarah. I'm guessing Mark never told you any of this? I closed my eyes. Me. No. He told me they just grew apart. Sarah. Figures. He always makes sure his girlfriends don't ask too many questions. I exhaled sharply, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had wasted years of my life on this man. Years bending over backward, trying to fit into a family that had no intention of ever accepting me. But I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. Mark wanted to play dumb? Fine. Susan and Richard wanted to act like I was disposable? Fine. I was about to make them regret it. The next morning, I booked a conference room at my hotel. It was a simple setup, just a long wooden table, a few chairs, and a folder of screenshots I had printed out from my conversations with Sarah. Then, I sent out the invitations. One to Mark. One to Susan. One to Richard. And, just for good measure, one to Sarah. If they wanted a war, I was bringing it straight to their doorstep. An hour later, the door burst open. Mark was the first to storm in, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. His parents followed closely behind, Susan's heels clicking sharply against the floor, Richard's face already red with anger. Sarah walked in last, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Glad you could all make it. Mark slammed his hands on the table. What the hell is this? I gestured around us. A conversation. You've been so eager to talk these past 24 hours, so let's talk. Richard scoffed, arms folded across his chest. You think this is funny? No, I said calmly. I think it's pathetic. Susan's eyes narrowed. You abandoned us. I actually laughed. Oh, I abandoned you? That's rich, coming from the people who spent an entire vacation pretending I didn't exist. Mark exhaled harshly, gripping the back of a chair. You're blowing this out of proportion. That was it. That was the moment I snapped. I slammed my hands on the table so hard that Susan flinched. I am your wife, I said, my voice echoing in the room, cold and sharp. Not some stranger. Not some outsider. I am your wife. And you let them treat me like nothing. Mark's face paled. I turned to his parents. And you enjoyed it, didn't you? The little comments, the dismissive looks, the isolation. You wanted me to feel small. Susan opened her mouth, but I cut her off. No, let me guess. I sneered. It's just your way. She shut her mouth. Mark ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Look, my parents can be a little difficult, but they mean well. I laughed bitterly. They don't even see me as part of the family. Silence. And then I saw it, the tiny crack in Mark's carefully built wall of denial. The moment he realized I wasn't wrong. That I had never been wrong. His parents weren't protecting their traditions. They were protecting their control. I reached into my folder, pulled out the printed text from Sarah, and slid them across the table. Read it. Mark hesitated. I leaned in. Read it. Slowly, he picked up the papers and scanned through them. I watched his face tighten with every word. Then, like the coward he was, he threw the papers down and shook his head. This isn't proof of anything. Susan straightened her shoulders. You're digging up old stories. It has nothing to do with us. I turned to her sharply. Really? Because last night, you texted me and threatened me. Her mouth snapped shut. Sarah let out a low whistle. Wow. Mark turned to his mother, eyes narrowing. You did what? Susan stiffened. I was trying to make her understand. Mark's jaw clenched. Understand what? I leaned forward. That this is a game to you. That you've done this before. That you did the same thing to Rachel. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Susan shot him a look. But the damage was done. Mark's face twisted. Jesus Christ. And just like that I saw it. The final crack. The tiny fracture in his loyalty to them. I stared at him, waiting. Waiting to see if, for the first time in his life, he would stand up for me. But then he sighed. I can fix this. My stomach dropped. That was his first instinct. Not an apology. Not regret. Just fixing the optics. I stood up, adjusting my bag. I'm not coming back, Mark. His eyes widened. Wait, what? I'm done. Susan scoffed. You can't just leave a marriage. I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. Watch me. And then I walked out the door. I walked out of the conference room, my pulse steady, my footsteps firm. I expected Mark to chase after me, to reach for my arm, to try and pull me back into the suffocating cycle of excuses and manipulation. But he didn't. The silence behind me told me everything I needed to know. He was still sitting there, stuck between the weight of the truth and the desperate need to pretend it wasn't real. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. By the time I reached the elevator, my phone was already vibrating. Mark. I let it ring. Then came a message. Mark. You need to come back so we can talk about this. I stared at the screen for a moment before deleting the text without responding. I had said everything I needed to say. For the next 24 hours, the calls didn't stop. Mark. His mother. Even Richard. The messages piled up, each one more frantic than the last. Susan. You are being incredibly selfish. Richard. This is not how a marriage works. Mark. We can fix this. Please just talk to me. And then, just as I knew she would, Susan sent the real message. Susan. If you don't come back, Mark is going to make things very difficult for you. I stared at the words for a long time, letting them sink in. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even anger. It was a threat. They weren't just trying to bring me back. They were trying to break me. I took a slow breath, cracked my knuckles, and typed a single response. Me. Perfect. Let's make things difficult then. The next morning, I woke up to an unknown number flashing across my screen. Ma'am, this is Officer Daniels with the Hilton Head Police Department. We need to speak with you regarding a missing persons report filed by your husband. I sat up so fast that I nearly knocked my phone off the nightstand. Missing persons report? Yes, ma'am, the officer said, his voice calm, almost apologetic. Your husband has reported that you left without explanation and have not been answering his calls. He expressed concern for your safety. I clenched my jaw so tightly it ached. This wasn't concern. This was control. I took a deep breath, my voice steady when I spoke. Officer, I am not missing. I left voluntarily. My husband knows exactly where I am. He has been calling me nonstop. This is an attempt to manipulate me. A pause. Then, would you like to file a formal request for no further contact? I hesitated for only a second before exhaling slowly. Yes. I would. And just like that, I put the first legal nail in the coffin of my marriage. An hour later, my phone buzzed with another message. Susan. Susan. I cannot believe you would humiliate us like this. I ignored it. Then another. Susan. You made Mark involve the police. Do you have any idea how this looks? I rolled my eyes. And then came the one that made me stop. Susan. You need to come back and fix this. I didn't respond. A few minutes passed. Then, the final message. Susan. If you don't come back, Mark will make sure things are very difficult for you. There it was. The real threat. They had underestimated me before. That was their mistake. Because now, I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to burn this whole thing to the ground. I pulled up my lawyer's number, took a deep breath, and made the call. It was time to end this. I made the call. The line rang twice before my lawyer picked up, his voice smooth and professional as he greeted me. I didn't hesitate. I want to file for divorce. The words felt powerful, final. He didn't sound surprised. Maybe he had heard the exhaustion in my voice the last time we spoke, when I had asked about options, about next steps. Maybe he could tell I had been holding on to something broken for far too long. He asked the usual questions: paperwork, logistics, legal proceedings. I answered each one without hesitation. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. And this time, I wasn't looking for anyone's approval. Not Mark's. Not his parents'. Not even my own past self, the version of me that had spent years bending, compromising, trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. That version of me was gone. By the time I hung up, I felt lighter. I stared out at the ocean from my hotel balcony, the waves rolling in, steady and endless. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the water, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Then my phone buzzed again. I already knew who it was before I even glanced at the screen. Mark. His name flashed across the display, but this time, I didn't ignore it. I picked up. Are you happy now? His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the frustration, the confusion, the realization that he had finally lost the one thing he thought would always be there. Yes, I said simply. He exhaled sharply. I don't understand why you're doing this. I laughed softly, shaking my head. You don't understand because you never listened. Because you never saw me. Because you let them treat me like nothing, and you were okay with that. A pause. A beat of silence that stretched too long. Then, quieter, more uncertain. I thought we could fix this. There's nothing left to fix, Mark. I could almost picture him then, running a hand through his hair, pacing in frustration, trying to piece together a way to make this my fault. But there was nothing left for him to twist, no more words he could use to gaslight me into staying. I had already left. I had already won. Another pause. Then, softer, almost a whisper. I didn't think you would actually leave. That made me smile. Not because it was funny, but because it was so tragically predictable. Mark had spent so long believing that I would tolerate anything, that I would always forgive, always stay. He had mistaken my patience for weakness. He had assumed that if he ignored the problem long enough, it would just go away. But he was wrong. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the horizon. Well, Mark, I said, my voice calm, steady, unshaken. You never really knew me at all. And then, before he could say another word, I ended the call. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, legal meetings, and final arrangements. I filed for divorce, cut off all contact with Mark and his family, and made sure every loose end was tied up. Sarah, his cousin, reached out to me once more, sending a short message. Sarah. I just wanted to say, good for you. You did what none of the others could. I smiled at my phone, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction settle in my chest. Me. I know. And I hope they never get the chance to do this to anyone else. She didn't reply immediately, but when she did, her words carried weight. Sarah. They won't. After you left, things imploded. Mark finally confronted his parents. It got ugly. Richard called him weak. Susan cried, saying you had brainwashed him. He saw them for what they were. But it was too late. Too late for him. But not for me. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. Mark tried to reach out one last time, sending a single text. Mark. I see it now. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long time before finally deleting it. Because for the first time in years, I was truly free. Life has a way of teaching lessons through the most unexpected experiences, and sometimes, the greatest lessons come from the most painful betrayals. When I look back at everything that happened, the silent dinners, the whispered dismissals, the calculated isolation, I realize now that I had been learning all along. I just didn't know it yet. It took me years of trying, of compromising, of waiting for validation from people who never intended to give it, before I finally understood the most important lesson of all. You do not have to earn a place where you are not truly wanted. Love, respect, and acceptance are not things you should have to beg for, and any relationship that requires you to fight for basic dignity is not a relationship worth keeping. I had spent years believing that patience and understanding could fix anything, that if I just endured long enough, if I proved myself enough, if I bent a little more, things would eventually fall into place. But life does not work that way. The more you shrink yourself for others, the less they see you. The more you tolerate disrespect, the more it becomes the norm. And the longer you wait for someone to see your worth, the more you convince yourself that it is something that has to be proven rather than something that simply exists. What I know now, what I wish I had known before, is that real love does not demand your silence. Real love does not make you feel like an outsider in your own life. Real love does not ask you to accept pain in exchange for fleeting moments of kindness. Real love does not require you to constantly explain why you deserve to be treated as an equal. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn was that not everyone will see you the way you deserve to be seen. And sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most will be the ones who diminish you the most. Mark was my husband. He was supposed to be my partner, my ally, the person who stood beside me when the world turned cold. But instead, he became part of the coldness. He didn't just allow his family to treat me as if I were invisible, he participated in it, whether through inaction or deliberate dismissal. And I let it happen for far too long because I wanted to believe that love was enough. But love is not enough. Love without respect is just obligation. Love without protection is just proximity. Love without acknowledgement is just loneliness disguised as companionship. I had always thought that being strong meant being able to endure, that resilience was measured by how much you could withstand before you broke. But now I understand that true strength is knowing when to walk away. Strength is recognizing when you are no longer valued and refusing to remain in places that diminish you. Strength is choosing yourself, even when the world has convinced you that doing so is selfish. For so long, I had believed that my marriage was something worth saving, that my role was to keep trying no matter how hard it became. But what I failed to realize was that a marriage is not a one-person effort. It is not meant to be a test of endurance. A marriage should never feel like a battle for survival. If you have to constantly fight to be seen, then you are not in a marriage, you are in a war. Another lesson that I carry with me now is the understanding that silence is its own kind of betrayal. Every time Mark shrugged and said, "It's just their way," he was making a choice. He was choosing them over me. He was choosing comfort over confrontation. He was choosing to let me suffer rather than disrupt the dynamics of his family. And in doing so, he proved that he was not on my side. Because the truth is, if someone truly loves you, they do not let you stand alone. They do not watch you drown and tell you to keep swimming. They do not hand you excuses instead of a lifeline. I also learned that leaving is not losing. For a long time, I was afraid that if I walked away, I would be proving them right, that I was not strong enough, that I could not endure, that I was not worthy of being part of their family. But the truth is, I did not lose anything by leaving. I did not lose a husband, I lost a man who had already failed me. I did not lose a family, I lost people who had never accepted me as one of their own. What I gained was far greater than anything I left behind. I gained clarity. I gained peace. I gained myself. Looking back, I also see that every act of cruelty, every moment of exclusion, every passive-aggressive remark was a warning. The signs had always been there, but I ignored them because I wanted to believe in a version of reality that did not exist. I told myself that it would get better, that they would come around, that if I just gave it more time, things would change. But people do not change unless they want to. And people who treat you like you are disposable will never suddenly see your worth simply because you love them harder. One of the most empowering things I have learned is that you do not owe anyone your suffering. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You do not have to accept mistreatment simply because it is easier than confrontation. You do not have to stay where you are not celebrated. Walking away from something that no longer serves you is not an act of weakness, it is an act of self-respect. I also learned that happiness is not something that can be found in other people. For so long, I had looked to Mark to make me feel valued, to his family to make me feel included, to my marriage to give me a sense of belonging. But happiness is not something that can be granted by others. It is something you create for yourself. The moment I walked out of that conference room, the moment I took back control, I realized that I had spent so much time waiting for someone else to give me the love and respect that I should have been giving myself all along. In the end, I did not just leave a marriage. I reclaimed my power. I stopped seeking validation from people who would never give it, and I stopped making myself smaller just to fit into a space that was never meant for me. I learned that my worth is not something that can be determined by others. It is not something that can be debated, negotiated, or stripped away by the opinions of people who do not see me. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away with your head held high and never look back. Because the moment you realize you deserve better, you have already won.